Plymouth Nations. I'm joined today by Randeen Neal, Minister for Water, Land and Resource Stewardship, Ravi Parmar, who's Minister of Forests, David Campbell, Head of the River Forecast Centre, and Matt McDonald, Lead Fire Weather Forecaster with the BC Wildfire Service. Today we'll be sharing details and projections on this year's seasonal risk for wildfire, drought and flooding across the province, and offering information and resources on how people can prepare. Climate change is having a real impact on communities around the world, and here at home we are seeing firsthand how devastating those impacts can be. From the wildfires, heat dome and atmospheric river in 2021, to the 2023 wildfire season, which was the most destructive in our province's history. It's clear that climate emergencies are becoming more frequent and more severe. We are working across government and doing everything we can to protect people and communities as we face climate emergencies together. We have spent much of last year implementing recommendations put forward by the Premier's expert task force on emergencies, and we've made significant improvements to how we mitigate climate emergencies, how we respond to emergencies, and how we support people who have been evacuated. From expanded financial assistance for people who are evacuated to new, easier ways to access support. That work that we've done and continue to do has strengthened the province's preparedness for all kinds of emergencies. At the same time, each season brings new challenges, and we will continue to learn and adapt to support people and whatever that season might bring. We also know that preparing for emergencies is a team effort, and whether it's the province, the federal government, local governments, First Nations, or people and families, everyone has a role to play. And the starting point is creating a household emergency plan. Now is the time to create a grab-and-go bag, like the one that we have here, and create that emergency plan. Last year, we launched the Emergency Ready Planner, which takes you through the step-by-step process of building an emergency plan. You can save your emergency plan to your phone so you can share it with loved ones, and everyone can get a copy. The Emergency Ready Planner can be found at preparedbc.ca/emergency-ready. Having a plan is essential, and it's equally important to have the right insurance. Having home or renter's insurance is the best way you can protect your home, business, and property if there's a disaster. When wildfires are burning nearby, it can become too late to obtain insurance, and that's why now is the time to get insured. Additionally, both home and renter's insurance policies typically have additional coverage for living expenses, and this is the best way to receive supports during an evacuation order. When there is an emergency, evacuation alerts and evacuation orders may be issued by your local government or First Nation. Those orders and alerts are posted on emergencyinfobc.ca and on X at emergencyinfobc. In urgent situations, people may also receive an alert through cell phones, radio, and television. I encourage people to bookmark Emergency Info BC as well as their local government website for verified emergency information. In the event there is an evacuation, emergency support services will be available to help people meet their short-term basic needs, such as accommodation, food, and clothing. If you live in an area that's prone to wildfire and flood, now is a good time to create an emergency support services profile using your BC Services Card app. To create an ESS profile, please visit ess.gov.bc.ca. We are approaching the time of year when seasonal hazards increase, and it's important that we all stay alert, stay informed, and stay prepared. While we're always hoping for the best, we prepare for the worst, and we know that we'll get through whatever the season brings together. Thank you for doing your part, and know that the province will continue to do ours. And now I'd like to pass it to Minister Neal to say a few words.
Thanks so much, Minister Greene. And I remember when I was on the other side of this microphone how much I appreciated these briefings every year, especially as we get into the freshet, drought, and wildfire season. So I'll talk for a few minutes. The Minister will talk for a few minutes as well, then we'll turn it over to the experts and your questions. So last week, likely you all saw the River Forecast Center released its April snow conditions and water supply bulletin. As of April 1st, 2025, the BC's provincial snowpack is at 79% of normal. So that's a slight increase from March when it was at 73%, but it's still below average. It is still much higher than the 63% we saw at this time last year, which was the lowest in a half a century. So we're doing better, but it's important to understand what this means in the context of flood risk. This past March brought near normal rainfall to the south coast, the Vancouver Island, and the Kootenays, but it was a lot drier across central and northern BC. And as we move further into spring, this warm weather will accelerate the snow melt. We're at the peak right now where we're going to start getting the melt. And when that combines with heavy or prolonged rains, it can increase the risk of flooding, especially in areas near rivers, lakes, and streams as well. So even with the below normal snowpack where we are right now in much of the province, we absolutely cannot let our guard down. The timing, the speed, and the intensity of the snow melt, along with rainfall or potential rainfall, are all key factors that can quickly shift conditions and elevate flood hazards, as unfortunately I think most of us in British Columbia know all too well. So from flooding then to drought, and the shift in climate is also threatening ecosystems across the province, from our coastal wetlands to inland forests and all of the species that also rely on them. So our efforts to manage water resources through flood reduction and drought preparation isn't only about protecting people, communities, and businesses, but they're also essential for safeguarding habitats and ensuring the survival of wildlife as well as the health of the landscapes that support our way of life. So we're investing in flood hazard mapping. We've talked about this before. Early warning systems as well, and community level response planning to help people prepare. And at the same time, we know that the risk of drought hasn't gone away. Drier than usual conditions in parts of the province, even today, and our experts will talk more about that shortly, combined with long-term water supply challenges, means we always have to be concerned about water use. It is always up to each of us to do our best to conserve water use. And if drought conditions worsen, we are ready, as Minister Greene said, to respond. So I want to thank all of the emergency responders today, the water managers and the community leaders who are working really hard to keep everyone safe as we enter into this season. As we head into freshet season, it's important to remember that even with a lower snowpack, there is still a risk of localized flooding. I've seen some warnings from different local governments already throughout the province, especially if we get heavy rain while the snow is melting, so please be aware of that. And in BC, it's not unusual to see flooding and drought happening at the same time, so that's why we're encouraging everyone to stay alert and be prepared and use your water wisely. I would now like to invite Minister Ravi Parmar up to speak. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Minister Neal, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ravi Parmar, and I'm British Columbia's Minister of Forests and Minister responsible for the BC Wildfire Service. First off, I want to begin by saying it's an absolute honor to be able to work with the people that make up the world-class BC Wildfire Service. I've been amazed and grateful for the hard work, dedication, and passion that people bring to protecting our communities from the threat of wildfires. I've been on the road for the last several weeks and months, meeting with wildfire crews, First Nations, and community leaders across British Columbia. Last weekend, I was in Penticton at the Wildfire Resiliency and Training Summit, and I met so many incredible people, including West Kelowna's Deputy Fire Chief, Brent Watson. Brent's a guy each and every day who puts his life on the line, puts everything on the line to protect our families and our homes from the constant threat and destruction by fire. Whether it's in the fall and winter, when he fights structural blazes in his home of West Kelowna, or in the summer months when he leads crews in the fight against record wildland blazes, and yet there are hundreds, if not thousands, of firefighters just like Brent who put it on the line each and every day, who answer the call when it comes, who put their lives on pause to stand between us and fire. That's the firefighting culture here in British Columbia, across local departments, First Nations, and the BC Wildfire Service. It was great to listen and learn from the people who are out on the front line every day, keeping us safe. And one thing for sure, wildfire is on the minds of many. The fires in California earlier this year were a stark reminder of how destructive wildfires can be. In British Columbia, as Minister Greene noted, 2023 was the worst wildfire season on record for our province. We not only lost homes, but also the natural landscape that so many people rely on. For the forestry sector, the 2023 wildfire damaged 20 years' worth of what we've historically harvested each year. Those losses hit all British Columbians, no matter where they live in this beautiful province. Today's outlook is just a snapshot. We don't know for sure what the upcoming wildfire season will bring, but what we do know is that the ongoing drought, as Minister Neil touched on, in many parts of the province, will likely play a role in wildfire activity this summer. That's why we've been making changes in how we tackle wildfires right across this province. The BC Wildfire Service has moved to a year-round firefighting model focused on prevention, mitigation, and preparation alongside suppression. This allows us to work closely with First Nations, local governments, and municipal fire departments and FireSmart BC to help communities prepare. We've also improved our wildland firefighting recruitment model, and I'm pleased to be able to share with you that the BC Wildfire Service received over 2,000 applications this year, a new record that goes to show that people right across British Columbia want to make a difference in their communities. New recruiting boot camps are happening this month in Merritt, and after successful pilots in recent years, more First Nations boot camps are being held in the Caribou, Coastal, and Kamloops fire centres. We're improving weather stations and camera networks across the province and continue to use technology that helps us predict wildfire activity so that crews can respond faster. Ongoing training and use of night vision technology is going to help our crews in 2025 ensure that they can work overnight with alongside enhanced respiratory gear, which will help keep them safe as well. We'll also continue to use the prescribed and cultural burning work that is happening right across the province. Thousands of hectares near communities are being treated alongside partners to help prevent fires. There are 88 cultural and prescribed burn projects planned this year, building on the 44 projects completed last year. People are putting in the work year-round to make sure we are ready for whatever this wildfire season brings. I encourage people around the province, as both ministers have said, to prepare for what is coming. And that is to take up fire-smart activities to ensure they're protecting their homes and communities. I want to ensure all British Columbians that we are going to do everything we can to prepare for what the wildfire season brings. Our experts from the River Forecast Centre and the BC Wildfire Service are here to dive into the details of where we are in terms of the snapshot today. And with that, I'll now turn it over to David Campbell from the River Forecast Centre.
Great. Thank you, Minister Parmar, and thank you for having given me the opportunity to speak today on a seasonal river outlook for the province. So, as Minister Neil mentioned, we released the April 1st snow bulletin last week, and it's really that information that I'll be sharing today. So when we look at the April 1st snowpack across the province, we are sitting at 79% of normal, or 21% below that normal range. So we are low, really at a kind of provincial-wide scale. And we can compare that to last year at this time, where we did see that extremely low snowpack of 63% of normal. So this year, when we look at some of the sub-basins of the regions around the province, we have some variability. When we look at the Fraser Basin as a whole, so those areas draining into the Fraser River down through the Lower Mainland, and really the biggest river in the province, we're sitting at 79% of normal as well, so right in that line with that provincial average. We've got areas that have a much lower snowpack, well below normal, and sort of 70% and below, and that includes really areas of the Central Coast, up into the Coast Mountains of the North Coast, and then along the dry side interior of the Coast Mountain ranges. So the Skeena-Nass Basin, down in through the Nechako Basin, the Chilcotin Bridge River systems, and down into the Similkameen. So those are some of the spots where we are really seeing that well below normal snowpack as we come into the spring. There's some pockets of the province where we do see that higher or closer to normal snowpack, particularly through the Okanagan, the Boundary, the West Kootenay, and we did see some rises in snowpack in the Lower Fraser, so South Coast Mountain area over the last month or so. Now, when we look at this across the season, we're very much at the peak of the snowpack season accumulating right now. So the April 1st survey gives us the best opportunity to look at how much water is available on the landscape to melt as we go through the melt season. Typically, when we get into the middle of the month is where we start to transition into that lower snowpack. This graph here really just shows that time series so that as we go through the season, and the colors represent the historic range. And we can see this year's in black where we do trip below that, kind of in that boundary of moderate into lower percentile ranges. And we can see in the lighter gray what we were at last year in that kind of record low of modern or recent times that we experienced last year. So we're sitting a little bit better. We're really expecting to see that transition to snow melt as we go through the next week or two here. And we're starting to see that melt season progress at lower elevations of the province. So we're very much into the season of melting snow now. So with that brings hazards. We talk about the term freshet. And when we use that term, what we're looking at is that snow melt period where that snow is accumulated over the winter melts off. And with that brings rising associated with that snowpack is being, proportional to how much snow we have. So those years where we do have high snowpack, that does increase the hazard. And in the years like this, where we do see lower snowpack, we do see a lower risk associated with flooding. But to say that it's not a predictive of it will or will not flood. It really is just that risk factor that we see going into the season. So as we go forward, the day-to-day, week-to-week, and seasonal weather are going to be critical for how the season unfolds. And we continue to have that hazard there throughout the snowmelt period as rivers are full. Now we're looking for adverse conditions that could cause issues, and particularly that extreme heat scenario, an extreme rainfall scenario, or any combination of those that really would drive increased runoff into the rivers. And with the low snowpack, we really do need to see an extreme weather driver to push flooding. It's not something that will happen with seasonal weather or if we have more favorable conditions like a slow, steady melt or drier conditions through the spring. Now, the flip side of this really is the drought hazard. And we know that we've gone through a series of seasons with increased drought. We did see in the rivers across the province some improvement in stream flows as we went through the fall, and then transitioned to a fairly dry period through January and February. And that's really what's driving the snowpack side of things. But it also drove low stream flow through that part of the year. On the top left here, I've just got a snapshot of all the dots. Those are measurements from the stream flow gauges from the Water Survey of Canada across the province. And we can see in the greens and blues, that's higher than normal flow for this time of year. Really, we are seeing high flows right now. And that's really been driven by a bit of an early melt from those lower mid elevations, as well as some wet weather through March and even the last couple of weeks. On the bottom, we can see this information, all these dots, but just strung out across time. So how has this changed as we've gone through the seasons, where we've got lots of those yellows and oranges and reds? That shows us a lot of increased drought or proportionally low stream flow. And that was really dominant up until about October of last year. We've gone through the winter with some improved, more blues in the chart there. We can see the little spike as we go through January, February, and then again into a little bit more favorable stream flow conditions through the latter part of the winter and into the spring that we see now. So similar with the floods, with the drought side, weather is also the critical factor as we go forward here, and spring and summer weather is crucial for where we're going to see river conditions as we go through the period. So the snow is one piece, but really that weather is important, and the spring is the wet season for the interior. Obviously, in terms of drought, adverse conditions that we're looking for would be things like hot weather, prolonged hot, prolonged dry, and really that favorable weather would be seasonal or kind of cooler again and wet as we go through the spring and summer. So the River Forecast Center continues to monitor the situation. We'll continue to release the snowpack snow bulletin and water supply bulletins. Those come out twice a month. What we're looking for in the upcoming ones really is how the snowmelt season is progressing. There's information on the website. If we need to issue any advisories, warnings, or watches, that will be posted there and distributed widely. as well as detailed information on forecasting, monitoring, and modeling. So with that, I'll wrap up and I'll pass it to the floor to Matt McDonald, the lead fire weather forecaster with BC Wildfire Service. Thank you.
Alrighty. Good afternoon. Thank you, David, for the handoff. My name is Matt McDonald. I work as the lead fire weather forecaster with the BC Wildfire Service. Minister Parmar referred to some of the cultural and prescribed burns that we have planned for the season, and those actually began all the way back at the beginning of March. Here's a photo from near Kamloops on March 8th of our crews working with local fire departments to introduce fire onto the landscape in a very controlled fashion. And the idea here is to eliminate some of the finer fuels and reduce the potential for more intense fires should fire enter that landscape later this summer. All right, so when we're thinking about the seasonal outlook from a wildfire perspective, it's actually really helpful to look back in the rearview mirror and remember how the last season ended. And what you have on your screen here is the drought code map for October 31st. And the drought code is really an indicator of drought on the landscape. It represents the moisture in our deepest organic layers. And your eyes will naturally be drawn to the northeast corner of the province. It's an area that's experienced lots of wildfire activity over the last two preceding seasons. And unfortunately, that drought, given that it's a multi-year drought, has persisted into the fall, and as we'll see, continues into the spring here. Another area of interest that's kind of been more recent to develop is stemming from the Balky Lakes area near Smithers and Terrace, Fort St. James, and then stretching down into the Chilcotin and to the interior plateau. So due to precipitation deficits over a number of months, that's another area the province has recently come online with climbing drought conditions. So that was how we ended the fall. And if we look at how the situation progressed over the winter, these charts indicate the total amount of precipitation compared to normal for each of the individual months from October all the way through March. The areas in white indicate near average precipitation, which is great. As we get into the greens and the blues, that's wetter than normal patterns. And then, of course, the browns indicate drier than normal patterns. So if we start with October, November, December, you'll notice quite a bit of white. It's a fairly wet period for us in British Columbia. And a lot of areas even saw the greens and the blues, focusing on Prince George, Central Interior through November, and that signal continued into December. David spoke about the very dry pattern that emerged in January and that persisted into February. So quite a dry period of time there where snowpacks didn't see much accumulation. But fortunately, as we got into March, the storm pattern became very active across the south. And we saw regular amounts of precipitation getting upwards of 200% across the southern parts of the interior. But note, the northern parts of the province saw their third consecutive dry month there into March. So when we step back and think about how the season outlook might play out, one of our key indicators is just how the oceans are behaving in terms of temperatures. This winter, of course, was a weak La Nina, which is defined by cooler than normal ocean temperatures down along the equator where that rectangular box is. La Nina has faded out, excuse me, and we're transitioning into what we call neutral conditions. So you can see the hues of orange and red showing warmer than normal sea surface temperatures down along the equator. Now, closer to home, over the northeastern Pacific, if we glance our gaze offshore British Columbia, you'll notice a fairly sizable amount of ocean that is exhibiting warmer than normal sea surface temperatures. And so that warm water is inevitably going to play into a warm seasonal outlook for the spring and likely into the summer as well. So what we've done here is, given the current drought conditions and some of our medium to longer term forecasts, we've projected how these drought codes may evolve under different precipitation scenarios. And you'll notice that no matter whether we see a dry next month or a wetter than normal next month, that deep, persistent drought that we're experiencing in northeastern BC is unfortunately here to stay, at least in the short to medium term. The other area, as I mentioned, is that western Chilcotin area, which really coincides with those lower snowpack values that David was highlighting in the Central Coast and the Chilcotin area. So definitely a second portion of the province that is at risk of seeing elevated fire activity this summer. Let's focus in a little bit on the Northeast because there has been a lot of talk and focus on the Northeast over the past 2 fire seasons, but there is a bit of a silver lining here. So the chart on your screen here shows the burn severity across the Fort Nelson and Fort St. John zones, so extending from the Peace all the way up to the Northwest Territory border. And we can see that there's really been a massive amount of landmass that has burnt over the last 2 fire seasons. The silver lining in that is that it's reduced the amount of fuels that's available to burn. And what it's done is it's introduced these natural fuel breaks on the landscape. So the potential for a Donnie Creek type fire to return in the summer of 2025 is much reduced, just owing to that previous extensive fire activity up there. We spent quite a bit of time here this afternoon speaking about drought, and it's really important to put that into perspective. If you recall last summer when we were entering the season, there was some really extensive, severe, and even exceptional drought across the landscape. And if we compare and contrast that with where we sit here today, yes, drought is still present, particularly in the Northeast and that kind of Chilcotin, Nechako area, but you can see overall the drought is less severe. So it's still with us, but we're kind of rounding the corner and we have seen some improvement. So if we finally get into our spring outlook here and what we might expect from both a temperature and a precipitation point of view, this is guidance being offered by a collection of international weather agencies. And the hues of orange and yellow indicate the potential for warmer than normal conditions persisting through the spring here. So that's likely to play out, particularly as we get into the last week of April. We've got some warmer weather coming down upon us. And then from a precipitation perspective, those longer term forecasts don't have as much skill, unfortunately, but there is a weak signal for coastal British Columbia and the center parts of the province to perhaps see wetter than normal conditions, and that would help counteract the effects of these warm temperatures. So we'll see how that plays out, particularly as we get into May and June, which are really key months in defining the nature of the fire season, depending and if those spring rains will materialize. So just to summarize here, overall winter precipitation was less than normal this winter, but we saw some really effective recharge heading into the fall season, which was great, and then a little bit more into March over the south. Of course, that Northeast sector and the Nechako region remain 2 areas of concern that we're keeping close eyes on. Over the winter, our crews did do quite a bit of work up in the Northeast, extinguishing some of those deep burning fires, these fires that have overwintered and have created multiple access routes to control those fires once our snow melts. But overall, definitely in the south, we're expecting a less aggressive fire start than previous years, owing to all that precipitation and an earlier green up than normal. So with that, I'd like to thank you for the floor time. We will be presenting our next summer outlook, second week of June, so please stay posted for that. And I'll pass it over to Minister Greene. Thank you.
We now have time for Q&A.
Thank you. Media on the phone, please press *1 if you have a question. Media in the room, if you have a question, please raise your hand. In addition to our speakers, we have subject matter experts on the line to answer questions. We have Kevin Dunbar, Executive Director of Provincial Operations, the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. Connie Chapman, Executive Director of Water Management, River Forecast Centre. Cliff Chapman, Director of Provincial Operations, BC Wildfire Service. And Graham Knox, Director of Emergency Management, Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And who had their hands up for a question? Okay. First question goes to Mark Page, BC Today.
Thank you for taking my question. This question is for Mr. Parmar. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about prescribed burning activities that are being undertaken? And I know that different agencies like BC Timber Sales was going to be getting involved in some of that. And just talk about maybe whether or not these are going to be continued to be expanded in the future, and if this is like kind of reflecting a new techniques and new approaches that BC is taking towards wildfire mitigation.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for the question. In one perspective, I would say, in a way, these are not new initiatives. First Nations peoples here in British Columbia have been doing cultural and prescribed burning since time immemorial. It was this government a couple of years ago, a couple of legislative sessions ago, that actually legalized allowing First Nations to be able to work with the BC Wildfire Service to continue providing the opportunity for cultural burning, and 40 plus cultural and prescribed burns. We're doubling that this year all across the province. In my travels, I've had an opportunity to be able to engage with First Nations communities, in particular elders, who've provided advice and guidance to the BC Wildfire Service in terms of this work. And I would say in relation to the expansion of the role of BC Timber Sales, we're certainly looking forward to playing a bit more of an active role in active forest stewardship, and that is right in line with active forest stewardship that First Nations people have been doing since time immemorial.
My next question is for Mr. Greene. You mentioned, people needing to get, insurance or get insurance before fire season begins, and I know in certain parts of the United States, like some areas have become almost like uninsurable. Is this like a concern in BC, and is there anything that the BC government's doing to prevent that from happening?
Insurance is a really important part of being prepared, and I really very much encourage everybody to, whether they're a homeowner or a renter, to have insurance. Wildfire insurance is available throughout BC. We do have regular conversations with insurance, the Insurance Bureau of BC, and insurance brokers, and wildfire is widely available. We don't have the same regulations around insurance as California. We're a different jurisdiction. If anything was to change within the insurance industry, we would want to know right away, and we don't have any indication of that happening. So folks should definitely be looking at their policies, though, and any optional coverage for overland flood and earthquake. I'd encourage them to take a look at that as well.
Next question comes from Emily Fagan, CBC.
Thank you. So Minister Parmar, I know you talked a lot about the different training and technology that's going into the preparations for this year's wildfire season. Can you talk about what you hope, what effect you hope that will have on the ground, if there is the need to respond to something? Yeah,
thanks very much, Emily. Look, I think British Columbians expect a lot of us in terms of the BC Wildfire Service for us to be ready to respond to what the 2025 wildfire season is going to bring. And so it's why after the 2023 wildfire season, the Premier launched an emergency task force to be able to look at how we can be better. And I would say it wasn't just that task force, as Minister Greene talked about. We're continuously looking to upgrade. It was this government that made the key investment in making sure the BC Wildfire Service was full year round. That full year round service led to us being able to provide support to our friends down south in California. And so whether it is the investments that we've made in our boot camps and our recruitment models, which have led to over 2,000 British Columbians wanting to be a part of the BC Wildfire Service to participate as wildland firefighters, whether it's all of the technology, AI upgrades, again, a really great partnership we have with UBC Okanagan that allows us to be able to put sensor cameras all across the province to better detect when wildfires occur and be able to provide data to better inform incident management teams, or the upgrades that we're making, not just in personnel and technology, but just in transparency and communication. I think if there's one message I also want to relay to British Columbians today is if you haven't downloaded the Fire Smart app, go on your Apple device or your Android device, wherever you whatever type of device you have, and download that today, and make sure that you utilize that app in the coming weeks and months, because that is going to be a key tool that we as a government and we as the BC Wildfire Service will be using to communicate directly with British Columbians.
Sorry, I guess the question was more specifically what difference do you hope that might make?
Well, look, I think from a difference perspective, we're looking to be able to be as responsive as we can. We don't know what the 2025 wildfire season is going to bring to British Columbia, but the steps that we're taking, I hope, will ensure that we are better positioned as a BC Wildfire Service to be able to respond with those challenges, to keep communities, to keep people safe. That is our number one priority.
Thank you. And my second question was, I guess we've talked about a lot of the different factors when it comes to wildfire and drought, but overarching, what should British Columbians take away when it comes to, what this season might look like in compared to previous, from what we know so far?
Thanks so much for that question. I think it would be great to hear from Cliff Chapman, BC Wildfire Season Service. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Greene and Minister Parmar. Maybe just back to your original question, and then I'll also address the second question in terms of this year relative to past seasons. So specifically, we've added some more tools and technologies into BC Wildfire Service over the course of the last year, and really over the last 2 years, we've been investing in new technologies. Minister Parmar referenced night vision flying. We're adding to the fleet of the night vision program so that we can expand that service a little bit more as we head into this summer. So that's going to make a difference on the ground in terms of being able to have night operations with aviation resources at night. Additionally, we've procured additional structure protection trailers, so that gives us more capacity to be able to deploy structure protection equipment like sprinklers and hose lays onto homes and businesses should a fire be encroaching a community. So, we're constantly in this evolution of learning from previous seasons. 2023 obviously taught us a significant amount about what we now face in this province. As members of it, as the public of this province, we know what we face now, and we're trying to make the right investments to try to be ready for whatever may happen, and obviously preparing for the worst. So we continue to invest and grow in our partnerships. We have over 100 municipal fire departments that are signed up to support wildfire efforts this year in partnership with us. And that's with Indigenous and non-Indigenous fire departments. So those are just a few examples. Happy to provide more off after the call if you're looking for more specifics. In terms of this year relative to past years, one thing we've learned in wildfire is that we have to prepare for this to be the worst fire season that BC has ever experienced. Obviously, we all hope that it's not going to be that way. We have indications, as Matt and David from River Forecast Center and Matt from BC Wildfire Service have shared. We have indications that would match this season up with previous years, like maybe 2021, maybe a little bit 2017 and 18. But one thing that wildfire has taught us, I think across the globe, is that the early season indications, while important to in particular show us what may happen in the spring, are not always consistent for what may happen in July and August, which are our core fire seasons in this province. So yes, we may have a busy start to the spring in certain areas where we saw the drought, but it's really going to be dependent on June. It's going to be dependent on the June rains. Whether they arrive or not will be a big indicator of what I would say our core wildfire season in July, August, and September will look like. Thank you.
Next question goes to
Minister Greene. We've missed the beginning, so you may be repeating yourselves in some parts here, but contextually, how would you describe, I know we just heard from fire what we should be preparing for generally when it comes to the conditions of drought, the conditions of water levels, the condition of fire. What are the key takeaways that British Columbians need as we prepare for the height of the season?
I think it's really important that there's two components of that. One is that the province is ready and capable and making plans for very strong response depending on the severity of the season, whether that is a response for fire or flood or other emergencies. The other part of that is that now is a really good time for personal preparedness. So making sure that your insurance is up to date and has the coverage you need, making sure that you have a grab-and-go bag, that you've made plans with your family on what to do in various situations. Have a nice cameo of a grab-and-go bag right up here. So I think those are the two components. One is that there's a provincial readiness, but also that this is the perfect time in the year for people to be personally prepared.
And Minister Neil, is there any concern that's lingering around our snowpack, but also our potential drought? And where are we at with preparing for that compared to what we've seen in the past?
I'll pass that over to the minister, and then I think it would be good to hear from Connie Chapman at the River Forecast Center.
Thanks, Minister, and thanks for the question. Yeah, at the beginning, and we can certainly get that to you, Richard, the presentation. Right now, we're sitting as of April 1st at 79% of normal in terms of our snowpack, and we're now at the peak of snowpack where we start to lose it. So we're heading into the freshet season, depending on how much rain we get, and the experts have said they're forecasting a slightly higher than normal rain season, precipitation season this spring. So that could lead to some localized flooding, which we have to prepare for. In terms of drought, there are still areas of this province that are in drought, and they will probably likely be in drought for the next potentially several years. So that's also something that we really, really have to prepare for and understand and have a plan around at a real community level. But maybe to get into more details, as Minister Greene suggested, I can invite Connie Chapman to give us a bit more information.
Thank you, Minister Neal. So as we've identified, the snowpack is sitting around 79%, but as Dave Campbell mentioned, really there's a couple other driving factors that we need to take into consideration, and that's those spring rains and also how the snow chooses to melt, so how the temperatures choose to show up. And so we're going to be watching those closely. We've learned a lot of lessons over the years, and it's within that space that we need to implement it. We know that there's areas that experience localized flooding on a more regular type basis, regardless of what the snowpack is. And it's within that timing framework of how the snow melts, how the temperature warms up, but also how those spring rains lead on. And so work has been happening within communities to help support mitigative measures be put in place and to build up those communities to be more resilient to those flood events that are occurring on a more frequent basis. As it pertains to drought, we do know that the province has been experiencing a deficit in precipitation over the last number of years. As Dave Campbell mentioned in his presentation, we did see those stream flows start to show some recovery into the fall and also the aquifers, but it doesn't mean that we're out of the woods by any means. And so Cliff Chapman touched on it a little bit in regards to the fact that right now we are sitting at a position where we look to be hovering just below that average. But really how those spring rains choose to formulate and how the temperature chooses to respond will really determine and drive the situation as to how drought may proceed. Another piece is also how those fall rains may show up. So back in 2023, we experienced a really late season drought, or sorry, 2022. I get my seasons mixed up a little bit, but we did see those late season drought conditions. So even if we do see, a wetter and cooler spring into the summer, it doesn't mean that we may not see drought conditions proceed well into the fall. And as Minister Neal mentioned, water conservation is one of those aspects that we need to be looking at on a continued basis, because we just never know how the severity of drought is going to play out, because so much is dependent on the different indicators and how they choose to show up within the season, whether it be temperature, those spring fall rains, and also the depth of the snowpack. Thank you.
Next question comes from Wolfgang Detner, Black Press.
Yeah, hi, thank you for taking my question. As we just heard, you described a paradox where the snowpack level is below normal, but we're also looking at higher risk of flooding in some areas. Which specific areas give government the most concern when it comes to this paradoxical combination? Thank you.
I think I'll direct that to Connie and have her thoughts on the matter.
Thank you, Minister Greene. I will start off and then I might hand this over to David Campbell, who can provide some additional information. I think the areas that we really want to watch are those areas that are sitting closer to the average of snowpack. So Dave Campbell mentioned the Okanagan boundary area being one of them. I think the other thing that we need to take into consideration is how the spring rains choose to formulate. So if we have a situation where we have high temperatures and we see a rapid melt of the snow, and then we are followed by a prolonged rain event, our systems are already full of water, so our streams have filled up to their banks, and then we're adding additional water onto it. So it really depends on how those streams can react and recover. There are some parts of the province that we do know experience that localized flooding on a regular basis, but a lot of it will determine on that timing period within the year. But I'll pass it over to Dave Campbell, who can provide some greater detail.
Yeah, thanks, Connie. Just to add, when we look at areas of the province, we've got that snowpack piece that I talked about, and we do see with that being low that those snow-related flood hazards are decreased. But what we are most concerned about is some of those more weather-driven factors that could come into play. And so we look at regions of the province. There's some areas that have those pockets of higher snowpack where we'd have a little bit, or closer to normal to higher snowpack, where we'd have some increased sort of vigilance around. So places like the Okanagan, the Boundary. When we look at areas that we'd have less concern about spring flooding, we're looking at areas that don't really have much snow or experience their flood seasons during the fall, winter. So places like Vancouver Island, areas of the South Coast. When it comes generally to the hazards, I think it is a province-wide thing that we look at. We know that the wet season is May and June, and it really is weather patterns that develop in then, extreme storm events, a lot of convective activity, particularly when it's large scale, upper lows, wraparound systems that can come in that particularly affect the sort of northeast of the province and areas into the Rockies. Those type of extreme weather patterns, particularly that rainfall, is where we're looking, and it can happen anywhere in the province. And it is typical that those patterns do emerge during that May and June period. So I think that's where the caution is. Despite the low snowpack, we really do need to be watching for these other factors that play a risk as we go through the season.
And if you permit to follow up, this is perhaps a larger question. There, just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think, where you announced new provincial funding for that community to protect itself against flooding in the future. But as we just heard, flooding is a possibility now. How does government reconcile essentially building up the infrastructure while it sort of confronts these immediate challenges? In other words, is the buildup sufficiently fast enough to compensate for whatever emergencies might be happening down the line? Thank you.
I think it's important to note that there's two parts of preparing for floods. One is that emergency response, and in the case of emergency response, we have significant amounts of flood control assets. As of this month, we have more than 2.9 million sandbags, 35 kilometers of tiger dams, 20 kilometers of gabion baskets, and 15 sandbag machines. They are pre-positioned in areas of the province that are at higher risk. And at the same time, we're funding communities to do flood planning, the planning part being really important to understand what are the most critical areas that need to be taken action on. And so since 2017, we've funded $390 million towards 569 flood control projects. We are continuing that work with a fund called Disaster Resilience Innovation Funding, DRIF. We've increased the amount of that amount by $10 million this year, recognizing that we need to work with communities to reduce their risk, just like we have in Merritt and Abbotsford and other communities. And so that work is very much in progress, and at the same time being ready to respond.
And now to the phones. We have a question from Michael Williams, 1130 News Radio.
Yeah, hi, this is for Minister Greene. We're talking a lot about preparedness. We do every year, but given the forecast, what are your biggest concerns heading into what could be, an intense flooding and wildfire season?
I think there's two components of that. I'd really like to highlight personal preparedness. I know that communities and families bounce back quicker from emergencies when they're personally prepared. So that includes insurance. It includes your grab-and-go emergency kits. Being ready for the kinds of hazards your community has. Different communities have different hazards that they need to be prepared for. The other part of that is the response on behalf of the province, and we are continually upgrading the way that we respond in an emergency, evolving through every emergency season to incorporate the learnings that we have. And for a more fulsome description, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin Dunbar from my ministry. He's the Executive Director of Provincial Operations.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Minister, and thanks for the question. I think the Minister, you've covered a lot of it. I think the other really important thing to kind of put forward when we're discussing this is around that personal preparedness, but also access to information. It's really important in an emergency that people listen to the local authorities, listen to people around them, and start to take that action. The sooner you can take action in an emergency, the better. The sooner that you can put your personal emergency preparedness plan into action, the better. Would encourage everyone to follow Emergency Info BC on X or bookmark Emergency Info BC on their web browser. That's where we share 24/7 the most up-to-date information on any emerging or ongoing emergencies. And we also work really closely, and we're currently working with community nations throughout the province to do hazard preparation sessions. So some similar conversations to this with local authorities to have an update on the weather outlook, what are the readiness actions that they can take, what's the support they can expect from the province, so that local authorities, First Nations can go into these seasons prepared for an emergency. And as the Minister said, cannot reiterate enough the importance of personal preparedness. Have your emergency kit ready, have your evacuation response plan ready, and follow Emergency Info BC so you have the information that you need in a timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And Michael, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. And thanks for the answer there. And this follow-up either for Minister Greene or Minister Parmar, but is BC planning to request support from wildfire crews in Washington and California this year? And if so, how might the current trade tensions affect those cross-border firefighting agreements?
I'll have Minister Parmar step up to the podium, but as well, I wanted to make sure that we have an opportunity for Cliff to have a few words at the end.
Yeah, thanks very much, Minister Greene. Let me be very clear. We have very strong working relationships with the California Wildfire Service right now in Penticton as we speak. We've got CAL FIRE representatives engaging with the BC Wildfire Service and local fire department leads right across the province. And so no matter what the President tweets, I think British Columbians can be rest assured that we will always be there to support our partners. And from the conversations I've had with CAL FIRE and other partners across this continent and much of the world, I know that they'll be there to support us just like they have in the last number of years. But I'll happy to turn it over to Cliff to talk more about the importance of those relationships and the process that leads to one needing to make that call.
Yeah, thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for the question. While I will not dive into the political nature of the question, I will answer the operational nature of it, which is as fire agencies across the world, we have learned over the course of the last decade, and probably even longer, but more so in the last 10 years, we need to support one another. Minister mentioned that CAL FIRE representatives are here. One of their chiefs is here right now, where I am in Penticton at the Resiliency and Training Symposium. And fascinating to hear one of their chiefs talk about the Canadian impact to CAL FIRE. We have sent, a number of our resources down there over the course of the last 5 years. They've sent some back up to BC in our times of need. We've supported them in their times of need. We've done that with Washington and Oregon as well. We have a very reciprocal relationship with those states, specific within those states. And worth noting, like all resource mobilization is either done through CIFC, the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center in Winnipeg, and they work with all Canadian fire agencies when we're in need of support, and or we can execute that relationship in BC through the Northwest Compact. So we can do that through Canada and or we can do that locally. And again, like politics, when we're in our time of need, when it comes to we've got fire on the landscape. The public of BC is being challenged by fires encroaching on communities. We have been given the green light by minister, by government, to ask for the help that we require in this province when we are in our time of need. So rest assured that if we need resources, we will have the ability to ask for them and to secure them to come and support us in BC should we require that this summer.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us, everyone. That concludes today's seasonal preparedness update.